here. All right, so just to kind of continue on, as you may have read in the invitation here, I actually have been a K12 tech director in the state of Kansas very recently, up until about a year ago when I came to work at Microsoft. And so we did not have any type of a cloud backup capability back then. And so I've really given some thought to if I were still at my school district, would I be using Azure Backup? How would I be using it as so? And really, why would I choose to use it over other things? So what I'm going to do today is I have a presentation that I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, but I think while I'm going to go through this presentation, I'm going to try at every turn to relate this back to how would I actually use it, why would I use it, those things. And so I challenge you guys to think of the same thing as we go through this and be willing to help me ensure that we're talking about real life scenarios that make sense to you in your environment, which is why we've kind of geared this whole series towards very specifically K12 IT pros. So that is not a picture of me. Unfortunately, I'm not near that handsome or distinguished. So I just went with the good old fashioned stock photo. But if you want to envision that I look that smart, let's stick with that. Okay, so on the agenda today, we're going to talk about Windows Server Backup. We're going to talk about Microsoft Azure Backup and how that ties in together. We'll also talk a little bit about, I'll switch to another deck for a moment to talk about how you calculate the price, because that just changed, in case you're not aware. It just got it got a whole lot cheaper. And, you know, in the blog article, it actually shows where over a 3-year period, you can save about 75% off of what you could previously. So if you looked at cloud-based backup in the past, I can assure you that everything has changed as far as pricing, retention, all of those things. And we're actually at a point where I'm super excited to be able to say that Azure Backup is a wonderful replacement to tape. It's a great total replacement to doing any type of tape backup, and that's something I'm very proud of, because we couldn't do that before. We didn't have that grandfather father son type of a relationship that could be set up with your retention or policy, not relationship. So it's great that that's in place today, that we can do, you know, say up to 10 years of storage with the cloud backup. It's great that the pricing has changed, the model has changed, so that it's going to make it much more feasible for you to be able to do those long-term storage pieces. So without further ado, let's get started into what is sort of cloud-based backup. What are some of the different scenarios where you would use this? What workloads would you back up? Those types of things. So as we begin here, we're going to take a look at what we would call hybrid cloud scenarios. So let's start off with, let's assume that maybe on-prem, in your facility, in your data center, you have SQL databases, you've got file servers, you've got maybe a mail server, Exchange, or whatever other types of workloads that you're running. But those are some great ones that everybody pretty well has experience with. And what we would look at doing is using Azure to back that up. So right now today, you have a standard backup client inside of every Windows server. And so you can actually add Azure Backup directly to that. And we'll talk more about that as we move into this presentation. But this is one great example of where we would just back those workloads up to the cloud and be able to do any recovery that's needed with just a simple VPN between the two, right? Just a site-to-site VPN built between Azure and your data center. This does work extraordinarily simply with Data Protection Manager. So if you already use System Center, DPM, or Data Protection Manager, you're going to find out that adding Azure Backup to this for your cold storage is super simple. It's no different than how you added a tape drive or anything else. And so you can take an existing protection set and be able to just go in and say, oh, I want to add cloud storage to that, or cloud backup to that, and it's very, very easy to do, to just register that DPM server and move forward with it. We'll get more into that as well. Some other scenarios are around DR and and backup are Azure Site Recovery is another tool that Microsoft uses beyond just Azure Backup to help you with that continuity planning. I've got two different scenarios showing here on the screen, and so kind of the idea is that here on the I'll grab my little laser pointer here, but you kind of build out your recovery plan inside of Azure, and then we use that connection to Azure to monitor the health of Site A in both of these two scenarios. So we got one scenario on the top and one on the bottom. And so we'll talk first about the bottom scenario because what you can do is, let's say that you already have a backup data center. So you've got a Site A and a Site B, and you're replicating your Hyper-V images from one to the other. And so we can actually use Azure to sort of monitor that from above. And if Site A becomes unreachable for any reason, then we can orchestrate that failover to Site B. And so one of the more exciting announcements about that is we've now come out with the ability to expand this beyond just Hyper-V, and we now can make this work with VMware tool sets as well. Now you have some on-prem servers that sort of manage that failover process. But the other cool part of this is this top scenario up here where you, instead of having to have a backup data center, you can use Microsoft Azure as that backup data center. And so this is the part that I am very excited about, because in my small school district, especially in my little rural school district of very few students, I couldn't afford a secondary data center. I don't know about you guys, but there were days when I felt like I could barely afford my primary data center. So I was trying to always figure out, how do I do a better job of offsite backups, those types of things. And we had tape backup systems, but people would forget to change them, or I meant me most of the time, right? Or I would keep using the same tape over and over, which I know is a recipe for disaster, because the odds of failure increase every time I keep reusing those same tapes. It's also, just remembering to check on those constantly. And then the biggest thing is just even being able to test any type of recovery from a tape can be a real nightmare scenario. So what's cool about this is when we start looking at Azure Site Recovery, not only can I use Azure as a real-time replication, right? So as we're working with the VMs on site, it's doing replication into Azure, but I can even test my failover to that. Now that's huge. In both these scenarios, I can test a failover without disrupting people's workloads, and that is imperative, especially when you're in a K12 scenario, and we all know there's no good time to take down certain workloads. Let's talk about like your SIS. So I was a PowerSchool admin, and there was never a good time to take PowerSchool down to test backup and recovery, because to test recovery, bring it online, change over the IPs, do all these things takes many hours. And the problem is that during school hours, people rely on that to enter all kinds of data and attendance and lunch counts and all these things, right? And after hours, teachers are entering grades, parents are checking on grades, students are looking at homework. There are all these other pieces and parts that tie into those engines. And so there isn't a great way to do that except super late at night, so in the middle of the night or on the weekends, which is not something that I particularly looked forward to. So being able to use something like this to be able to do real-time testing is huge as far as the value to you as an IT pro. So there are all kinds of other things that we can look at too, which is using Azure as part of your DR scenario, where we can do things like put up a domain controller. We can set up a whole domain controller availability set, which means that we've got multiple domain controllers setting in the cloud that are doing real-time synchronization with your sysvol on site. So we're actually a part of we're just extending the Active Directory, creating a new site inside of Azure, replicating up to it, and then we can have a couple of different servers, 2 or 3 servers setting in this domain controller availability set. So if any one of them went down, the others could pick it up. We could extend the entire ADFS. If you use single sign-on through Active Directory Federated Services, you can extend that into Azure as well. And so this is more of the disaster avoidance type of scenario. And One of the big ways that we start seeing K12s now moving into Azure in particular is with web front ends and web application servers. So a lot of times in your SIS, you can separate the web front end from the database back end, which is fairly typical. And so moving just that web front end into Azure so that you have that scalability if you're doing online enrollment with it, or so you have that elasticity to expand automatically for it, those types of things. But also because you can set up these availability sets and ensure that if one server were to go down for any reason, you've got another one setting there. So lots of backup, DR, and business continuity concepts in this one little slide here. The last piece that I want to talk about along this line before I really dive deeper into very specifically backup and how simple it is to set up Azure Backup is part of this same conversation, which is a tool that we have called Store Simple. This has been a very important solution for us over the last really 12 months that I've been here anyway, and I don't know about prior to that, but Store Simple is actually an appliance that you can take and replace an entire rack of SAN with this one little appliance. Now, I don't always look at this being your tier 1 SAN storage, but typically it works great for like your tier 2 or tier 3 type storage workloads. So examples of that are archiving is a great one. You know, there's tons of times where we have data that we want to store, or we want to keep, but I can't really throw it away. I'll tell you a good one in K12 a lot of times is yearbook and newspaper, right? So those guys generate tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of photos every single year, and you're talking about terabytes of storage. Well, there's some great historical value to that, and hopefully they pare that down so you're not storing every single file or every photo they've ever taken or every video they've ever captured. But being able to retain that for future use has some significant value to many organizations. It's just that most of the time the cost doesn't justify it. And so what you end up with is some of these shadow IT programs, I like to call them, where that classroom has their own drive array of some sort. Maybe it's a Drobo or other device that sits in that classroom where you're going to store data just for them on, maybe up to a 16 terabyte array or something, but you're not really backing it up. You just got drive redundancy. You certainly don't have any geographic redundancy in it. So this is a great example. What this Store Simple lets you do is it is a hierarchical storage management, right, or tiered storage. So let's say that you copy that data from those file servers. In this example, I'm going to use yearbook. Let's say we move all those photos to Store Simple. Well, the Store Simple appliance is just a nice SCSI target. So you can set any kind of SMB server in front of it or anything. So I can just take a regular Windows server, share that out, and now I can store all of my files onto that Windows server, which is really the Store Simple in the background. And what happens is when data is first moved onto there, it's active, right? So it's all stored in the solid state drives, and it's all deduplicated, which is really important for those types of workloads like yearbook. But then what happens is as that data becomes, it sort of ages out, if you will, it gets pushed back to the SAS tier. And so it's still stored on site, but now it's on spinning disks, which are still super fast, right? Probably what you have in most of your servers today, but it's a little bit lower cost storage. And then what happens is as it ages further, it gets pushed, continually deduplicated. It's compressed at that point, and it gets encrypted and pushed out to Microsoft Azure. What's great about that is you guys maintain all of those encryption keys. So those encryption keys don't even ever come to Microsoft. You have it, so there are no data privacy concerns or anything. So you can actually use this for archiving any type of data. And of course, we do that with all the different snapshots and everything that you work with. So kind of moving that forward, you can also use file shares there. You can do any kind of, if you have SharePoint on-prem, you can absolutely use that as your storage for it. Tier 2, Tier 3 SQL databases, perhaps as a backup target for SQL. That's a great way to do it. integrated backup, restore, and disaster recovery built right into it. So some great choices there. Even working, let's say you're a vSphere customer, and I know many of you are, and so you can actually use Store Simple right along with VMware storage. So there are very few examples where this doesn't reduce your total cost of ownership and ensures that you have snapshots pushed out to Azure as well as being able to use this hierarchical storage management. Have somebody requesting control. I'm going to deny that. Before I move on to the Azure Backup piece, I just kind of went over a sort of a high level of all of this. Are there any questions at this point? You can either type them into the chat window or just pop off mute and feel free to speak to me here, guys, at any time.
There's nothing in the chat window.
Okay, great. So I will continue on, and again, guys, feel free. I want this to be a two-way conversation as much as you're willing to ask questions. Otherwise, I will just keep going through the material. So as we talk about Microsoft Azure Backup, I guess what I should say is really by integrating Windows Server Backup with this Azure Backup, you can protect your important data offsite, right, very easily. And so that's the most important thing to understand here is that this is a simplified method to get offsite backups. So let me tell you about my particular scenario when I was in a K12. When I first started there, we had these bonded T1 pairs. This means we had 3 megabit of symmetrical data connectivity, right? And what that really comes down to is when you would look at my router with the charts, the bandwidth charts that would come off of that, and utilization would show that, right before school, we would peak with the amount of data usage, but that was typically in a downward direction. They were downloading things, and then there were a few other times of the day when we'd see those peaks. But by the time I left there, we had upgraded to I think they're now at 100 megabit per second, and it's amazing. People will use all of that data that's available, and certainly our reliance on technology has increased. But what's funny about it is that utilization graph hasn't really changed a lot, other than how high the top bar goes. Right? Because what I really find out is in the evenings, I'm using almost no data, and I'm certainly not using that symmetrical uplink channel to anywhere near the degree that I'm using the downlink. And so Azure Backup is a perfect tie in because you have all of this sort of unused backup or unused bandwidth that's in the upload direction, and specifically upload in the afternoons and the evenings, or evenings and nighttime, right? And so it's essentially already a sunk cost for the transport, which is fantastic. And so what I want to kind of get past that, but I bring that up because to me that was something that made a lot of sense. I always wanted to do online backup. I worked with a lot of other tech directors in Kansas on some different calls where we talked about how could we do this ourselves, how could we back up to one another and those types of things in the evening. But now with Azure Backup in place, and as we get to the pricing, you're going to see that the pricing really supports this being probably the lowest total cost of ownership for doing backup. But more importantly, and I can't stress this enough, is how stupid simple all of this is compared to any other type of backup that I have seen. And the fact that probably every one of you has seen Windows Server Backup, right? You've used Windows Server Backup, the discrete backup utility, at some point to just say, I need to back this server up one time, or I need to back it up multiple times, where you just simply go in and select, here's the data I want, here's the frequency I want it backed up, and here's my retention policy, and it happens, right? Now we can tie Azure Backup to that just as easily. So I'm going to do something that I typically don't do a lot of, and I'm actually going to follow the script on here a little bit because I want to make sure that you guys really understand sort of these components around Azure Backup, and then we'll get back to the conversation again in just a second. But kind of the notes I have on this are that backups are encrypted before transmission and stored encrypted in Azure. So these backups are offsite, safely away from your data center, and protected by reliable Azure storage. And that's reducing the need for secure and to secure and protect the on-site and backup media. So A good example of that is I'm not very good at staying on script, am I, guys? But one of the things that's a problem is I know a number of schools have gone to offsite disk backups. So instead of tapes at all, maybe they've done disk to disk, and they take that disk offsite, so some kind of removable disk piece. And the problem is now you got to figure out how are you securing that. You have all kinds of student data, those things on it. So could somebody steal that from you? Could a less than trustworthy employee within the IT department rehydrate that data at home in some fashion, and so now they have a home copy of it? There are all kinds of concerns around that when if you're sending your data home with employees, or are you paying some company to haul them off site? So in this case, everything is encrypted. So I like that a lot. The next piece is a simple and integrated solution, meaning that you manage cloud backups from the familiar backup tool in Windows Server. So Windows Server Essential also works, as well as System Center Data Protection Manager. These tools provide similar experiences configuring, monitoring, and recovering backups, whether that be to local disks or to Azure storage. Or you can use the agent software itself. So after data is backed up to the cloud, authorized users can real easily recover backups to any server. So that's an important one to understand, right? You don't have to restore the data to the original location or even the original server from whence it was backed up. So you can actually recover this data to anywhere else using these tools. So it's also very efficient and flexible. With incremental backups, only changes to the files are transferred to the cloud. So this helps ensure efficient use of storage and reduces the bandwidth consumption while enabling point-in-time recovery of multiple versions of the data. So configurable data retention policies, data compression, and data transfer throttling actually offer added flexibility and help boost that efficiency. So, you have total control over this is really the theme in that section. So what does it really look like? What does Azure Backup actually look like? And this is one of my favorite parts. So normally I would do a demo here, guys, but the issue is that when I try to do a live demo of backup, it's going to kill my bandwidth. It takes too long. You guys all know. Yeah. Somebody have a question?
I'll be home.
Nope, I don't think that was a question. Okay, so I'll keep moving on. So what I've done instead is I just have some screenshots here that I can kind of walk you through a usage scenario. You're welcome to, again, if there's something that doesn't make a lot of sense, feel free to jump in and ask. But the first thing that you've got to do is complete sort of all the registration stuff, get set up with Microsoft Azure Backup. So in order to use this, you have to have an Azure subscription, which is a monetary commitment, right? So Azure is a sort of a debit-oriented system, right? You're going to pre-purchase some amount of Azure, and then you're going to consume or use those funds over time, right? So perhaps you would look at purchasing, let's say, $5,000 worth of Azure. So what you would do is you would actually work with your reseller to purchase around $5,000 worth of Azure up front, or maybe it's $50,000. It all depends on what your usage is. And we'll get to in a minute how you can calculate what the cost of backup would be given your server set and everything else. And then you purchase that in advance, and then you draw down from that throughout the years you utilize it. And so that there's no stress point there. If you happen to purchase too little, that's fine. We'll actually re-up with you, or your reseller will, on a quarterly basis, right? So if you end up using more than what you initially purchased, that's fine. We can work with you on that too. So back to this. So that's the first step. You've got to have an Azure subscription, we refer to that as. And once you have that, then you can go in and sort of get set up, register with Azure Backup. So what that really means is that you're going to go in and create a backup pool, right? Or backup vault, sorry. You go into the management portal in Azure, you go to recovery services and backup vault, and you just do a quick create. And really what you have to do there is just select what region. So do I want that in the East region or West region. Where do I want my backup vault? You're going to want it as close to you as possible because that makes your backups, faster, your restores faster, those types of things. And then in the subscription, you're gonna enter the Azure subscription that you want to use the backup vault with, which will be right there in the list, and you just simply click create the backup vault. And so once you have that, then what you'll be able to do is download your vault credentials, and maybe I can show you some of that here in a little bit. But you'll set this up, and then what you'll do is you'll actually have a agent that you install onto your server. So right now what we're talking about is, I want to back up and put a scenario around this so that it has more context for you. Let's say that you have a primary data center where you run some kind of an enterprise backup system. I'm going to assume it's Data Protection Manager now because I have great familiarity with it. And most of you, when it comes to pricing, the cost of running a System Center Data Protection Manager is unbelievably inexpensive for education. I'll put it that way. So if you're not using it, you really ought to look into it because it's super easy to use and crazy inexpensive in my opinion for what it does. But I'm going to assume you have that at your primary data center. Then I'm going to talk about what do you do when you have that remote site. Let's say that you've got an example I like to use a lot of times is a bus barn, right, or a busing facility. So they're part of the school district, but you don't really have them tied in necessarily with the highest speed connection, or maybe you've got a rural school that's got DSL connections. That's what my issue was. I had a number of schools that the only internet connectivity available was DSL with like a less than 1 meg upload, and so I couldn't run I could, but running my backups back to my local data center and then turning around and pushing those up to the cloud really wasn't the most efficient solution. And so the best way to do this there would be to actually just drop Azure Backup onto the servers at those remote locations, sort of like branch offices, right? And now I can back up straight to the cloud from that location. And I'm not using this inefficient model of moving from one spot to another and then backing it up. I can gain much more efficiency with it. Now, there are some efficiencies lost from a management standpoint, and you should always weigh that. And I'm not encouraging to go one way or the other, but that's one good example here of where you would install this directly onto a server. Perhaps you have a financial server that you're doing a separate set of backups for. Maybe you're doing a disk-to-disk backup, and you want to add this to it because it's governed under a different set of policies, or it's in a different local VNet of some sort that can't communicate with your typical DPM server. Then you can use this as a great option there. So when you install this agent on your server, right? The backup vaults your organization get created. You get a public key certificate for the backup vault, and so you have to have that tied between the two. You'll just download that. You choose which backup vault you're going to use. In this case, I have K12 backups, right? I just select that one. I tied it to the West region. Now I enter in my passphrase, or I have it generate one for me. It doesn't matter. And then I enter a location to save that passphrase, right? It generates these keys for me, the certificate, and that certificate gets saved as a text file. And the next piece is I'm going to step into my actual backup utility, and now I can schedule a backup. This looks super familiar to all of you because it integrates directly with the server backup GUI, where I'm going to select, okay, I want to back up these folders or this entire drive, and just simply move forward with that traditional wizard. Now this one's kind of cool because I can come in here and choose, with the same granularity that I've always come to expect in a solid backup solution. I can choose which day of the week, which time of the day that I want to do that backup. And then I can get into throttling that bandwidth, which is the part that I really like for schools, because it's very possible that I still need to throttle that backup because there's some other traffic that goes through in the evening, or maybe I want to run these backups more often. So a good example here of one that I'm talking to one customer about, they have their building principles set up. So it's important to note I can install Azure Backup to a client device as well, not just a server, but to a Windows 8 device in this particular case, where they can have their building principles install this, and now their machines automatically back up to the Azure cloud every 4 hours. So all they have to do is throttle that backup. The odds are that there's going to be very little change on a 4 hour basis, since we're only moving the delta, and there's a compression on that. So what we're really looking at here is making sure that we don't somehow flood the network if some anomaly occurs. But it's great to be able to have that level of control. And then finally, we get into how you do recovery. So recovery is just as simple as it's always been. I go in, I traverse the directory structure from the backup, choose which file I want restored, and then I'm going to walk through this wizard of where I want it restored to, the original location or somewhere on another server. So all things that you're very familiar with. One of the things that this particular slide set doesn't show is your ability to do the retention policy. And that's just because I haven't updated this slide set yet since we added that. But you can absolutely set up the grandfather, father, son retention components and get up to 10 years of backup storage currently on it. So you could also set it up to where this is stored, and you got a new backup taken every day, and it's stored up there every day, and you can get 365 copies of that data. And what's cool about it is doing deduplication, so it's only storing the changes or adding the changes to it. Or not deduplication, but the delta packets going up there. So I'm going to jump out of this presentation for just a moment. Please forgive me, and I'm going to pull up the another one where I can show you the pricing examples. And the reason I'm going to a different one is because we have kind of changed how pricing works in Azure Backup. So what does Azure Backup cost, and how does costing work is kind of what I want to talk about here. So this is, bring back my laser pointer here. The way that we do this is for each machine that is being backed up, there is I'll call it a software cost, right? A per instance cost. We call it a protected instance. And so for each protected instance or each server that you have, you're going to pay a monthly fee. So in the case of me backing up a administrator's laptop every 4 hours, I'm going to pay $5 a month for that capability. In the case of backing up a remote server or a server at one of my remote schools, I'm going to pay $10 a month for that server if it exceeds 50 gigabytes in total size, right? So you can see it's tiered. We have the 50 gig and under, and then we've got 50 or 500 gig and down to the 50, and then anything over 500 gig. And so what's interesting about that is, how does that work when we talk about enterprise backup solutions like Data Protection Manager, or many of the others support this same cloud backup capabilities. And so the way that those work is, even though DPM is aggregating all of that backup for you and then making a singular connection and transfer up to Azure, you're still paying a flat monthly fee for each server that DPM is backing up. So as the example that I've been following, same scenario, in my primary data center, I may have 30 server virtual machines that are running that I'm backing up with DPM. And so I would pay, between $5 and $10 a month, depending on the size of those, for each of those individual machines. Now, there is another fee on top of that, but as you can see, it is very, very small. And so this is what we call block blob storage, and it's just the way that the data is stored. And so this is the part that kind of changed, which is that data is stored now in a very low cost method up there, to where we're talking about the LRS and GRS is important to understand because LRS is the locally redundant storage. So everything that we write into that block blob storage is going to be replicated to 3 separate disks, right? So that if we were to lose any one disk, then the other 2 disks would still be up and running until we get that back. So it's redundant, it's stored in multiple places, and we have that built into it. You also have the option, if you wish, to have geo-redundant storage as well, which is the GRS, and it's twice the cost. And the reason why is because it's twice the amount of storage, right? Pretty simple calculation. What you're doing is saying, I'm going to write my data to the east region, and then I want it to replicate back to the west region, and so I will have geo redundancy. So let's talk about where that makes sense and sort of where maybe it doesn't, or where there are other options. So a great example is if I'm using Azure Backup for cold storage to replace tape backups, for example, and I'm trying to do long-term retention, then I probably don't need geographically redundant storage, right? Because I already have my local disk-to-disk backups that I have in place today. I've got that stored in my local SAN. I've got these multiple copies that are already in place. And what I'm looking for is long-term retention, cold storage, and 1 copy might be sufficient there. You know, it reduces my total cost of ownership on that and gives me the sort of still improves my the security of my data over time over what I had with tape, because the ability to restore it is always going to be there. But just like with tape, I didn't send off multiple copies of that same tape to different states in the nation every night. So this gives me that ability to do that. Whereas geo-redundant storage is used a lot of times in the perhaps it's nightly backups. So in the if I'm doing regular backups of a device or with shorter retention periods, those types of things. Perhaps it's I'm doing direct to cloud from DPM, and maybe I'm even still choosing to use tape for long-term storage, but I'm using that as a 30-day retention period on anything that I might need as a, you know, and I need to guarantee availability, and geo-redundant makes sense at that point. There are no charges, though, for any kind of data restore. That means the outbound bandwidth to sort of download it, to bring it back down to you, also has no transmission costs at all, and there's no storage transaction fees either. And so I should note that these prices, it says it down at the bottom, it's kind of cut off, are in the U.S. West data center region, and prices do vary a little bit depending on which data center region you store stuff into in Azure. So as you start working with Azure, that's something to note, just because there are different costs of doing business in different areas and different hardware in different data centers. So those do kind of vary, and you want to pay attention to that when you're storing it. And the prices on this slide are what we would call MSRP. And so you'll want to check with your individual reseller to see how these work. Now, that URL that you see on the screen right now, I will grab that real quick and put it into the chat window. And the reason why is it's actually a blog post that has a ton of great information about all the new pricing and everything that's there. And more importantly, it has the actual pricing calculator. So there's like an Excel spreadsheet that you can go in and be able to list, here's the size of my my VMs in storage, here's the number of them, and it'll take all of this stuff I show on the screen right now and spit out a sort of a bottom line estimate for you. Even better yet, and this is really super cool, there is actually, in this article, there is a script that you can run. If you use System Center Data Protection Manager, you can run a little PowerShell script that will go out and gather all the data about your environment, and then feed it. You can feed that directly into the Excel spreadsheet, and it will kick out pricing for you and just simplify that whole process. So I really encourage you to check out that URL. I think it has some very pertinent information for anybody who is interested in doing cloud backup. And let's see here. I think with that, we're going to actually switch back over to our other presentation. Yeah, there we go. That's just showing you kind of the difference in the, when you put in the store simple, the difference in size between it and maybe some other SAN you may have. Not really what I was looking for. So I'm going to get you back over to our presentation. So now we return to our regularly scheduled programming. Okay, I've got about 15 minutes left. So this is the point where I am going to stop and just say, if you have any questions, now's the time to throw them out there. I will use the rest of this time, if you don't have questions, to talk about centralized backup and recovery for critical data and how you can use Data Protection Manager with Azure Backup, if you guys want to dive into that. But are there any specific questions, or do you guys want to see the Azure portal? Anything that you're interested in from that standpoint? Okay. One other thing that I want to make sure I get over to you guys is I have Azure portal. Okay, I'll show that to you. I want to put this link in here as well. This is a MSDN article that I have used in the past. And when I say used in the past, so when I do live demos of this from time to time, and this is the exact step-by-step directions that that I have used to work with configuring Azure Backup Vault and registering a DPM server into it. I have another one here too that I'll post in. That is, I'm going to grab it. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling while I get this for you. That's also around using DPM. So let me bring you into the Azure portal here. I'll get us logged in. I'll move this over. You guys can see it onto that projection screen in just a second here. I'm just getting us logged in. Sometimes I think these demos are, even though I'm just going to kind of show you around an existing one, sometimes I think it makes it all much easier to work with. I have a couple of different Azure subscriptions, so bear with me as I get signed into the one that I have some of this backup stuff in, so you can see what it really looks like. It's happening slowly but surely, guys. Okay, so I have to go into a private portal here. So I'll use the in private browsing. Let me finish logging in here. So if you check out those two articles, those are pretty much word for word, or step for step, how I set up my demos. So normally what I do when I do technical demos is I write up these lab notes that I can send out to you and say, hey, here's exactly how you could recreate this in a lab environment and start playing with it. But it has been my experience that with Azure Backup, those articles that I just sent you are probably the best way to get started. So what you guys should be seeing now as the screen updates is the new Azure portal. I'm going to actually go back into the classic portal for a little bit and show you. So if you happen to load up into Azure and you see that, you can use it, or you can go back into the classic portal where it's a little bit easier perhaps to show you some of these pieces. So as I mentioned before, that when you go to create an Azure Backup Vault, I'm just going to kind of walk you through that. So you log into this management portal and then go to recovery services over here on the left-hand side. I just got to figure out where it's at right here. Recovery services. And then what you're going to do is go into Backup Vault and do a quick recovery. When I say that, what I really do is I come down here to New, right? And under Recovery Services, when I click New, it automatically brings me, because that's where I'm at, Recovery Services. I then see Backup Vault. I click on that, and I can do Quick Create. and it says, okay, give me a name, and I'm going to call this AD Server 1, right? Or actually, this is my backup vault, so I'll call this Primary Data Center. Yeah, we'll just call it Primary DC. And I don't want that in East Asia, right? Because that's clear on the other side of the world. That's not going to give me the backup and restore times that I want. I'm going to look at the US West data center. I'll tell it to create the vault. It'll now go and spin that vault up for me. Once I have that set up, then I can download those vault credentials. So the way that I do that is I just click right here on the vault, and it's still creating it. So I'm going to skip and go into another one that I have set up called, we'll use the server vault here, right? Assuming you're just backing up some of your discrete servers. And so I come into here and I just want to download those credentials, which you can see is right here under step 1. So we tried to make this as intuitive as possible. You're going to install the Azure Backup agent and register your server. So the first thing you got to do is download the credentials, store those somewhere. Note when you download these, they're good for 2 days. So don't download them until you're ready for them, right? Then download the agent, get it installed. Make sure you've got the credentials setting there, right? Because during the install, it's kind of what I showed you before. When you install this agent, it's going to ask you for those credentials at that time, right? So they're all right here, and that makes it much easier to work with. And then you're going to start protecting items, which is just working through that typical backup piece. And I didn't mention before, if you do have virtual machines setting in Azure, so Azure IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service, you can back those up here as well. We're not talking about that in today's discussion, but if you have existing virtual machines in Azure, you can use this for that purpose. So what this kind of shows me, I want to take you through this dashboard a little bit. I'm going to drop back to the DPM vault because I have more data in it. But you can see it's exactly the same. It's just a vault. It tells me I can download the credentials. When I go to the dashboard view, I'm going to see, okay, how many servers do I have tied to this? I have one DPM server that's tied to this. Azure Virtual Machines, I don't have any that I'm backing up to this vault. And I could have my DPM server and my Windows servers using the same vault. I have it set up differently because of the way I was conducting my demo. That's why I have 2 different ones here. My total storage inside this is 1.16 gig. Now I'm backing up a Windows 7 and a Windows 8 machine into DPM, and then DPM is backing that data into here. And you can see that right here from a glance that failed jobs in the last 24 hours are 0, successful jobs in the last 24 hours are 0, same with jobs in progress. And that's simply because my DPM server is offline when I'm not using it. So right now it's not doing any kind of backups. But it would show me, I could see, the point is at that dashboard, see if I had any failed backups. So here I can see the name of my servers that I have registered or any VMs that I have registered to this single backup vault. I can also come in here and see what are my protected items. So I can see that I have 2 different protected items, and in my case, those are DPM volumes, one for each of the different servers that I'm using, and it shows me the different backup pieces that I have for them. I can even come in here. This is a brand new piece where I can configure the locally redundant or geo-redundant. And the reason why I can't do that today is that didn't used to be the choice. It was only geo-redundant, and I need to update the client on my machine that's being backed up because I need the new client in order to take advantage of the new pricing and the new storage mechanisms. And I have no backup policies in place today. I could create a backup policy very easily. That's where I would go in and say this is how frequently I'm going to back up and what my retention is going to be for my VMs inside of Azure. That doesn't really apply when I'm using my DPM server or my Windows server or a direct client. Again, I can back up. I can install that client off this front page, which is the little cloud. I can install that directly onto any in-client machine. So can a machine be a desktop or strictly servers? Absolutely desktop. So I can take a a Windows machine, and let's say you've got a Windows 7 machine setting there. It says right here Windows Client. And when I click that download, it's just going to install this executable, and I can back it up directly to the cloud that way. So all I need is download the credentials, run that, and you can get started with it. It really is very simple, very easy to do, and I can bring back up that sort of wizard interface if you want to show it, but it's just a simple backup, Windows backup that you've always seen. Let me pull that up. It'll come up and it's called Azure Backup is the new client that will get installed. It doesn't look like I have it installed on this machine right now. We don't have time to do that, or I would go ahead and do that in this demo, but it's going to look like any other backup and restore that you've ever seen, where you're going to just select what gets backed up, you're going to set your retention policies, and then when you go to do a restore, it's going to sort of work in reverse that. It looks very similar to Windows Server Backup when you run it on, when you run the Azure Backup utility. So that's really all there is to this. It's super simple to do. Data Center Protection Manager, just to kind of show you what that screen looks like. When you do backup, I'll kind of jump ahead. You guys, we kind of talked about how you can back up different workloads with it. You can have DPM virtualized now, so it can back up VMs and be virtualized itself as long as you're using System Center 2012 R2 DPM. And so that's actually how my lab is set up, so I know it works, and it does do storage deduplication and all those types of things. I can get you more information on that if you want. I'm trying to see, I think I have actual slides that show, here we go. So when you're in DPM, it looks just like all of these other servers for backup. I basically, what I would do in DPM is I install the DPM agent on clients, on machines, whether those are Windows end user, so Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10 machines. I assume there's a client available for it by now. And I install that client, then they report to DPM. I go into DPM, I select those machines, say make this part of a protected group, and then I go in and set my backup policies for that protection group. I can do it very granularly, saying what gets backed up. Right there's what I wanted to show you. So adding cloud backup to this is this simple. I mean, it really is. This is how hard it is. I want short-term protection using disk. That's pretty normal. That's what we see all the time when we're doing backups, right? That we're going to protect by backing up to disk. But I also, while I have this tape capability, I have, instead of tape, I want to use online protection. I check that box. That's all there was to it. And now when I'm in here, this is what my recovery console is going to look like. And when I go to recover, right, I click on a date and it shows me over here, I can drop down this recovery time, and it's going to show me the time every time on that date where there is a restore point. And it's simply going to show me whether that's disk or cloud. And so to me, when I'm trying to restore data from a particular point in time, I don't really have to worry about whether that's in cold storage or locally on the disk or where that's at, because this is going to take care of all that for me. I just select the date, select the recovery time snapshot I want to take it from, and then it'll either pull it from the cloud or from the disk, depending on where it's actually stored at this time, based upon those policies that I set previously. Looks like there's another question. Well, this looks easy that even me as a non-techie guy can do this. Yeah, now I agree, Jeff. It really is point and click, right? Because here's what the difference is if it's a cloud, right? It's just going to show you it's a cloud, but truthfully, it works just the same as any other backup you've been doing. So that's where I'm going to end for the day. I would just tell you guys that if you have any questions at all, you can always reach out to me personally. My email address is prpiney@microsoft.com. I don't expect you to remember how to pronounce my name if you call me on the phone. That's okay. I don't take offense. You can also follow me on Twitter, which is I'll post like the recordings. I'll post when those are ready on Twitter, so you can find them. I will also continue to post when upcoming sessions are. The URL that you guys use to get to this invite most likely was a bit.ly address, which is, I'll pull it up here in 1 second and paste it in as well. You can always use that. I will use that exact same Word document that's stored online and shared out to you to paste in the links that I've put into the chat session, as well as the recording will be posted there. So keep an eye on that. If we add additional sessions, those will be there. For instance, one example is last week we added in K12 dashboards using Power BI. That's now going to be on the 15th of May at 1 p.m. Central Time. And so just keep watching that. I'll keep adding more stuff. Now, last thing before you guys all jump off. If there are other sessions you would like to see added to this series that we're doing, man, just let me know. I'm here to help you guys plan for the summer. Having been in your shoes for many years, I know that right now is the time when you're finalizing what projects are we actually going to work on, what's the priority of the project, so we know which ones to put in at what time slot. And it's my opinion that if I'd have had somebody helping me along the way work through how difficult or how easy are these tasks, that really would have helped me with the prioritization. Sort of like this backup. A lot of people keep putting off backup. They aren't doing any type of offsite backup in K12. And it's because it's a daunting, expensive ordeal. If you're stressed about figuring out what this would cost you, get a hold of your account executive or get a hold of me directly, and we'll help you figure out what that cost model is for your particular environment. But please don't put it off because there's a lack of understanding. This is crazy easy to do and has just gotten much, much cheaper than anything I've ever seen. So let me know how I can help. Guys, we're at the end of our time. I truly appreciate you. I hope you'll join us for our next session, which is actually later today, which occurs at 2 p.m. Central Time, which is Windows 10 and K12. This is one I have a whole lot of passion around. I think Windows 10 is going to be awesome. I hope to see you all there. With that, I'm going to stop the recording, and I wish you guys all a good rest of your day and hope to see you soon.